The horrific murder that shocked all of Canada happened by sheer chance, triggered by the pathological lies of a criminal who got tangled in a web of his own deceit. Brett Ryan was born in 1980 in Toronto into a large, close-knit family. Besides him, the Ryan couple had 3 more sons, older Christopher and Leland and younger AJ. The parents, who advocated for a healthy lifestyle, tried to instill the right values in their children. The head of the family worked at a newspaper and moonlighted as a fitness coach in his spare time. The mother devoted herself to housekeeping and growing flowers, which was her passion. The woman had to be strict, sometimes even harsh in raising 4 boys, while the father was known for his gentleness and restraint. Each of the sons followed his own path in life. Chris worked as a conductor and was very modest. Leland found his calling in photography and music, and Brett was always described as a gregarious, cheerful guy. Chapter 2. Brett's Academic and Financial Woes. After finishing school, Brett enrolled at the University of Toronto but quickly encountered difficulties with his studies. The young man went through 2 painful breakups with girls, after which he couldn't focus at all on preparing for exams and eventually dropped out of college. He watched with envy as his friends and classmates built relationships, got married, and achieved success, while he couldn't get anything right. This bred a sense of failure in Brett. After getting a job as a painter, the guy realized this wasn't for him. At the same time, Brett loved himself, strived to look good, and spent a lot of money on his own needs and on girls. Because of this, he accumulated a large debt, 60,000 Canadian dollars, which he had no way to repay. Creditors started demanding their money back, which plunged Brett into a deep depression. The young man felt like a total loser, but never confessed his problems to anyone. Chapter 3. Brett's bank robbery plan. Desperately trying to find a way out of his predicament and quickly get his hands on a large sum of money, Brett resolved to rob a bank. On October 20th, 2007, he set his plan in motion. The guy chose a financial institution not far from his house. To disguise himself, he wrapped his face in bandages and faked an injury to his left arm. Pretending to limp and carrying the stack of papers, Brett entered the bank posing as a sick man. Approaching the teller, he handed the cashier a note demanding money and threatening that he had a weapon hidden in his bandages. The frightened employee quickly gave the robber all the cash from the register, but it turned out to be just a little over $1,000. Although Brett wasn't happy with this amount, he decided not to draw extra attention, swiftly grabbed the money, and vanished from the crime scene. Despite the security cameras recording the robbery, Brett managed to avoid arrest. Feeling a sense of impunity, he continued robbing banks, but in other parts of the city. Changing his disguise tactics to a hat and a fake beard, the young man became more cautious. In total, Brett robbed 12 banks, netting over $28,000 in loot. Chapter 4. The Unmasking and Imprisonment of the Robber. Eventually, the police managed to track down the brazen robber, and on June 20th, 2008, 28-year-old Brett was arrested during an attempted robbery. The guy's family was in deep shock, as Brett had once volunteered at a children's hospital and had now turned into a criminal. The court sentenced him to 5 years in prison. While serving his sentence, experts evaluated the convict's mental state and found no signs of aggression or propensity for violence. Throughout his time, Brett never used prohibited substances and had no mental disorders. Moreover, due to his exemplary behavior, he was granted parole after 2 years. The prison staff were simply charmed by this pleasant, charismatic, and hard-working young man. In their opinion, he had just made a fatal mistake due to the burden of debt and deserved a second chance. Brett's profile stated that he was a model prisoner with minimal risk of reoffending. Chapter 5. Brett's attempts to start a new life. According to the terms of his parole, Brett had to undergo a course of psychotherapy and report any problems he encountered in his family relationships, with girls, or at work. After all, these were the factors that could trigger him to relapse. But despite his sincere intentions to start a new life, reality proved to be much more complicated. The debts didn't go away, and there was no way to pay them off. Finding a job with a criminal record turned out to be extremely difficult. No one wanted to hire an ex-convict even as a painter. In desperation, Brett declared bankruptcy. His parents came to the rescue, supporting their son financially. This allowed him to resume his studies at the university, but this time in the information technology department. Brett also continued to visit a psychotherapist by court order and diligently tried to put his life back together. It was during therapy that he was advised to be more honest and open with those around him. Chapter 6. Brett and Kristen's fateful meeting. One day in September 2011, Brett's friend set him up on a blind date with a pretty girl named Kristen Baxter. She worked as a physiotherapist, lived in her own apartment with her little dog, and loved to travel. A spark instantly ignited between Brett and Kristen. They immediately hit it off and felt a mutual attraction. The young people were united by common interests. Brett, like Kristen, adored animals and travel. Soon they started dating. The couple spent a lot of time together, attended sports events, and went on hikes. Brett even accompanied Kristen and her family on a vacation to the Bahamas. Plus, the girl's dog immediately took a liking to him. It seemed that Brett's life was finally getting back on track, and he was no longer drawn to dubious ventures. He longed for a quiet and cozy life next to his beloved girlfriend. In January 2013, Brett moved into Kristen's apartment, marking a new stage in their relationship. The couple began to think about getting married. Chapter 7. Hiding the truth from his beloved. A new life began for Brett. The young man who had grown up in a quiet suburb was now immersed in the bustle of vibrant city life with its numerous restaurants, shops, and interesting places. The young couple enjoyed visiting cozy eateries together and taking evening swims in the pool. However, as it turned out, all this time, while Brett's brothers were building their careers and becoming independent, he was only studying, living on his parents' money. The couple often traveled to warm countries together. Brett's father suddenly passed away. The young man temporarily moved in with his mother to help with the funeral arrangements and support her during this difficult time. That's when he confessed to Susan that he was madly in love with Kristen and dreamed of marrying her. However, he didn't have the money for a decent engagement ring, so he hesitated with the proposal. Touched by her son's words, his mother handed him money for an expensive ring. Brett bought a luxurious diamond ring and proposed to Kristen. Beaming with happiness, the girl said yes. The couple immersed themselves in pleasant wedding preparations. Brett even looked for side jobs to be able to surprise his beloved and shower her with gifts, but these were insignificant sums. The guy had no idea how he would provide for a family in the future. He carefully concealed from his fiancée his problems with the law, bankruptcy, and debts. Abandoning his futile studies, Brett focused on finding a decent job. Chapter 8. A failed attempt to get a job. At the beginning of 2016, fortune finally smiled upon Brett. He got a good job in the field of information technology. The guy joyfully shared this news with Kristen, and the couple decided to celebrate the occasion with family. However, as soon as his new employer learned about his criminal past, they immediately refused to hire him. This was a crushing blow to Brett's ego. Not wanting to upset his beloved, he decided not to tell her about yet another failure. Instead, Brett pretended that he would be working remotely from home. While Kristen was getting ready for work, he pretended to be working at the computer. The girl was happy that they would finally get on their feet and Brett would start earning good money. She enthusiastically prepared for the wedding, scheduled for September 16, 2016, choosing the most beautiful and expensive options, as they could now supposedly afford it. A luxurious banquet hall was booked for the ceremony. The pre-wedding bachelor party was planned to be celebrated at a posh ski resort. The couple even started looking at a spacious and cozy house where they dreamed of settling after the wedding, as they were tired of being cramped in a small apartment. Susan was overjoyed, believing that her son had finally gotten on his feet, graduated from university, and found a high-paying job. The woman eagerly anticipated the wedding and Brett's move into his own home. Chapter 9. Brett's lies exposed, but in reality, this was all a blatant lie. Brett had nothing to his name but deceit. He got so tangled up in a web of his own fabrications that he couldn't extricate himself from it. In desperate attempts to get money, the guy took any side job he could find and even helped his mother around the house for pay. He came to her every day, looking for things to fix or do around the house to receive financial rewards. Susan found her son's insistence suspicious, as he hung around her house all day long, constantly tinkering with something, instead of working. If Brett was earning as well as he claimed, why did he need these odd jobs, the woman wondered. She started asking her son uncomfortable questions, which he initially tried to dodge. But then, remembering the therapist's advice about the importance of honesty, Brett finally dared to confess his troubles to his mother. He begged Susan for substantial financial assistance, promising to keep looking for work. However, his mother was extremely disappointed with her son's life failures. She was filled with indignation that Brett hadn't even managed to finish university and get an education. Susan flatly refused to give him money and threatened to tell Kristen everything. Chapter 10. The Birth of a Criminal Plan. His mother's harsh words infuriated Brett. He was seized by a panic fear that Kristen would leave him if she learned the truth. The guy was desperate to avoid this at all costs. More than anything in the world, he feared ending up on the streets again, without his beloved girlfriend, and returning under his mother's care. Brett didn't want to feel like a miserable loser for the rest of his life. And then a monstrous plan took shape in his head. Since his criminal record prevented him from legally purchasing firearms, Brett decided to get a crossbow. To avoid attracting undue attention, the guy bought a used crossbow for cash. The next day, Brett went to his mother's house again, supposedly to help with repairs for money. Chapter 11. The Bloody Massacre. On August 25th, 2016, Kristen woke up early as usual and went to work to see her patients. Brett pretended to stay home and work, but in fact, he started getting ready to go to his mother's. Suddenly, it dawned on the guy. To avoid suspicion, he needed an alibi. The resourceful Brett crafted a device that imitated him working at the computer by periodically pressing keys. In addition, he set up automatic email sending at a specific time. Next, Brett packed all the necessary items for his disguise into a sports bag, including clothes and a wig. Slipping out of the house unnoticed through the fire escape to avoid being captured by surveillance cameras, the guy headed to Susan's place. Just as stealthily, in a mask and wig so that no one would recognize him, Brett arrived at his mother's house. On the doorstep, he took off all his disguise and went inside. Once again, Brett tried to talk to his mother and convince her to help him with money, but Susan was unyielding. A fierce argument broke out between them. The woman insisted that her son confess his lies to Kristen himself. Otherwise, she threatened to expose him on her own. Meanwhile, the quarrel flared up with renewed vigor. Sensing something was wrong, Susan took advantage of the moment when Brett briefly stepped out and urgently called her eldest son, Chris. She begged him to come over and help deal with the conflict with Brett. And Brett went to the garage for a reason. He had hidden a crossbow there in advance. Returning with the weapon, the guy started fiddling with it, setting everything up for the shot. This task turned out to be not so simple and took some time. Suddenly, his mother entered the garage. In a fit of blind rage, Brett grabbed the first tool he could find and struck Susan twice, hitting her cheek and ear. The woman screamed in pain, shocked that her own son had raised a hand against her. A fight broke out between them. During the scuffle, both fell to the floor and rolled around in a tangle, knocking everything down in their path. Brett groped for a long, dirty rag and, without much thought, strangled his 63-year-old mother with it. Only after committing the deed did it begin to dawn on him that everything had gone wrong. The perfect murder had turned into a nightmare. The guy suddenly remembered that Chris, summoned by his mother, was about to arrive. Upon seeing her body, his older brother would immediately realize whose handiwork this was. Without much hesitation, Brett decided to get rid of Chris as an unwanted witness. He jumped up, grabbed the crossbow, and started fiddling with it again. Now a plan to kill his brother was brewing in Brett's head. Having prepared everything for the new crime, He lurked in the garage, waiting for Chris. Soon, the unsuspecting 42-year-old man crossed the threshold in search of his mother. At that moment, Brett silently approached him from behind and shot him point-blank in the back of the head. Chris instantly fell dead. Brett dragged his bloodied body over to his mother's corpse and covered them with a tarp. The guy rushed to grab his bag of clothes to quickly change and flee. Unexpectedly, Brett's younger brother, 29-year-old AJ, appeared at the doorstep of his mother's house, coming for a visit. For Brett, this was a real catastrophe. He frantically pondered what to do next: change clothes and run, or stay and kill AJ too. Brett feared that his younger brother, upon discovering the bodies, would immediately call the police, and then he would certainly be caught. This pushed the guy to commit yet another gruesome murder. After tracking down AJ, Brett followed him, holding the crossbow at the ready. He crept up to his unsuspecting victim with the intention of cunningly shooting him in the back of the head, just like Chris. But this time, something went wrong. AJ sensed danger and noticed the armed Brett. A life-and-death fight broke out between the brothers. At some point, Brett managed to wound AJ, hitting him in the neck with the crossbow. AJ screamed in pain and fled. He ran out of the house, leaving a trail of blood in the sand, and collapsed exhausted in the driveway. It turned out that there was another brother in the house, 39-year-old Leland, who had been carelessly sleeping this whole time. He was awakened by AJ's horrific scream. Looking out the window, Leland saw his bloodied brother on the path. The man rushed to the phone to call 911, but he didn't make it. At that very moment, a crazed Brett pounced on him. A fierce fight broke out between the brothers, which rolled through the entire house, turning it into a bloody mess. Taking advantage of the moment when Brett was distracted, the wounded Leland managed to slip out unnoticed, crawl to the neighbors, and lose consciousness on their doorstep. The good people immediately called the police. Meanwhile, the enraged Brett dashed back into the yard, catching a glimpse of the wounded AJ, who was trying to crawl away, bleeding. Obsessed with the desire to finish off his younger brother at all costs before he attracted the neighbors' attention, Brett chased after him. Chapter 12. The finale of the bloody drama. As he pursued AJ, Brett suddenly saw that Leland had managed to fully rat him out to the neighbors. From that point on, the guy no longer had any chance of salvation. The police were about to arrive at the crime scene and put an end to his bloody odyssey. The brilliant plan for the perfect murder had crumbled to pieces. In despair, Brett decided to surrender. Unhurriedly, he returned to his mother's house, grabbed a bottle of water, and settled on the porch, patiently waiting for the arrival of law enforcement. When the first patrol cars and an ambulance pulled up, the medics immediately pronounced Susan and Chris dead. AJ was still showing signs of life, but was in extremely critical condition. On the way to the hospital, he died from his injuries. As for Leland, although he was hurt, he survived. He was urgently hospitalized and provided with the necessary medical care. Over time, the man began to recover. Chapter 13. The shocking truth for Kristen Brett was arrested at the crime scene and faced terrible charges of triple first-degree murder and attempted murder of his brother. The news stunned Kristen, as there were only 3 weeks left until the wedding. The unfortunate bride learned the horrifying truth about her beloved for the first time: his criminal past, conviction for robbery, financial problems, lack of a job, and the gruesome murder of his own family. How could she have lived under the same roof with this monster for so long? The shocked girl immediately canceled the wedding. Returning to the apartment, Kristen discovered the contraption Brett had crafted himself for his alibi. Not understanding what this strange gadget was, she mistook it for an explosive device and frantically called the police. Law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, promptly evacuated the building's residents, and began cautiously examining the mysterious device. It soon became clear that it posed no danger, but the cops were amazed by Brett's extraordinary ingenuity and scrupulousness. One couldn't deny his intelligence and inner strength, which unfortunately he had channeled in the wrong direction. If only Brett had chosen the right path in life from a young age, his potential could have brought much good to society. Chapter 14. Admission of Guilt and Sentencing. At the court hearing, Brett decided to plead guilty. He made a deal with the prosecution, agreeing to have his actions qualified as a triple second-degree murder. Trying to mitigate the sentence, the guy claimed that he had only planned to scare his mother with the crossbow and have a serious conversation with her. Allegedly, he wanted Susan to finally understand and support him. But unfortunately, everything got out of control. Brett swore that he had not intended to do anything to his brothers. They had simply ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. However, the prosecution insisted otherwise. In their firm belief, the defendant had planned from the very beginning to brutally deal with his mother, not just talk to her. The prosecutors argued that Brett had taken the crossbow with him specifically to kill Susan, and therefore must face severe responsibility. As a result, the guy was found guilty of first-degree murder of his mother and second-degree murder of his brothers. The court handed down a harsh sentence: 3 life terms with the right to parole no earlier than 25 years. In addition, Brett was sentenced to 10 years for the attempted murder of his brother Leland. All punishments are to be served simultaneously. This means that the guy will only be able to seek early release in a quarter of a century. The sole surviving brother Leland greeted the verdict with relief. Despite all the pain and bitterness of loss, he sincerely respected Brett for his expressed remorse. In Leland's deep conviction, his younger brother was not a bad person at heart, but had unfortunately become hopelessly lost in life. Brett had stepped onto the slippery path of deceit and eventually got completely mired in the quagmire of his own lies. He could no longer extricate himself from it, which led to a terrible tragedy. Brett Ryan's horrific story serves as a warning to us all. It vividly demonstrates how seemingly small lies and concealing the truth can lead to dire consequences. At some point, the lies grow, accumulating new details, and become uncontrollable, ruining not only the deceiver's life, but also the lives of their loved ones. Brett had every chance to get on the right track after his first prison term. He had the support of his beloved girlfriend and family. He could have gotten an education and found a job. However, the guy chose a different path, the path of untruth, which ultimately led to a terrible tragedy and destroyed more than one life. It doesn't matter whether Brett acknowledged his mistake sincerely or if his remorse was merely a way to soften the sentence. What's much more important is what conclusions he will draw himself while serving his life sentence. Will he be able to rethink his life and at least try to become a better version of himself? Only Brett himself knows the answer. However, his story definitely makes us reflect on our own actions. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize once again, honesty and responsibility are not just pretty words, but a vital necessity. It's important to value our loved ones, trust them, and share our problems with them. After all, it's much easier to overcome difficulties together and find a way out, even from seemingly hopeless situations. Only on a solid foundation of truth, trust, and mutual support can we build a happy future. And perhaps had Brett Ryan known this, he would have never set foot on the wrong path that led him behind bars. This story should serve as a lesson and reminder to all of us that our most precious treasure in life is our family and loved ones. So let's cherish them, respect them, and above all, be honest with ourselves, because self-deception is the first step towards a real-life tragedy. The case of Shafilea Ahmed, a monster with an angelic appearance. Psychological and physical traumas received at an early age can have a very unpredictable effect on adult life. Of course, far from always, they lead to the fact that a person becomes cruel and seeks to hurt others, but sometimes it is the trauma can give rise to a real monster. Criminal psychologist Adrian Rain believes that there are genetic and psychophysical mechanisms that can turn a person into a cold-blooded killer, about which he wrote in detail in his book, Anatomy of Violence. History knows a lot of serial criminals who had a truly hellish childhood, and perhaps to them can be attributed our heroine today, Shafilea Ahmed. This woman had an angelic appearance which she skillfully used, seducing her victims and then brutally murdered them. Despite the fact that the court was able to prove only 2 of her crimes, criminologists are sure that there were many more. And now let's look at this difficult story from the beginning and try to understand whether Sheila Labar was a born monster or became him as a result of the cruelty that she faced in childhood. Who is Sheila Labar? Sheila Labar was born in 1958, the 4th of July, in the small country town of Fort Payne, Alabama. She was the youngest of 3 children of her parents and was raised with her brother and sister Lynn. Her childhood was spent in a picturesque but rather secluded place, on a farm nestled among cornfields. According to the memories of Lynn's older sibling, Sheila was an active, inquisitive, and open-minded girl with a creative streak. She liked to be in the center of attention, had a good voice and cute appearance, so perhaps, if her life had turned out differently, she would have become a famous actress or singer. But instead of bright posters, her name decorated the pages of criminal chronicles. The unimaginable cruelty of her father. The head of the family, Manuel Bailey, for many years suffered from alcohol addiction, although it would be more accurate to say that his addiction suffered from his entire family. He often went on binges, turning into a real beast who enjoyed abusing his wife and children. He insulted and humiliated them, beat them with anything that came to hand, could throw everyone out in the middle of the night in a downpour or frost, and locked himself in the house, not letting anyone inside. Mothers, daughters, and sons often had to spend the night in a barn or in the open air in the field. One day, when Manuel was once again in a drunken rage, he began throwing dishes and other objects at his family members. The mother tried to cover the children as best she could, but one of the flower pots thrown by her husband hit her youngest daughter Sheila in the head. Sheila suffered a serious concussion and a lifelong scar on her temple, which she painstakingly covered with her hair. But not even the insults and beatings were the worst thing that the sisters had to endure in their parents' home. According to the memories of Sheila and Lynn, Manuel from an early age forcibly inclined them to intimacy. The mother may have been aware of what was going on, but the subject was never broached. However, despite the nightmare at home, Sheila did well enough in school. She dreamed of leaving the farm as soon as possible and go to conquer the big city. The girl was quite ambitious and determined. She passionately wanted to realize her childhood dream in life and become an actress or pop singer. And she had everything for this: charisma, bright appearance, and a beautiful voice, adulthood, first marriage. Barely Sheila was 18 years old. She left her parents' home, but adult life was not so joyful. To enter the university, she was not allowed to average score, and to move to the big city, she simply did not have the money. Then Sheila got a job as a maid in one of the hotels, where by that time her older sister was already working. It should be noted that Sheila had a slender figure and a very attractive appearance. She had big blue eyes, a charming smile, and a mop of thick long hair. She was surrounded by attention from men, and over time, she learned to use it and manipulate her suitors. In the late 70s, Labar, then Bailey, met a guy named Jonathan Baxter, and a romantic relationship began between them. Jonathan was not yet 20 years old at the time, but he already had a young daughter from a previous relationship. However, the child did not become a hindrance, and soon the couple got married. However, this marriage lasted only a few months and collapsed after Jonathan learned that the young wife abused his daughter while he disappeared at work. Sheila was frankly annoyed with the child, and she would raise her hand or lock her in a closet if she started crying or acting up. Jonathan did not organize scandals and listen to explanations. He just Strasut filed for divorce and put his wife with his belongings outside his house. He never wanted to see or hear from her again. After the divorce, Sheila dated various men and mostly lived off them. But all these relationships were fleeting and lasted from a few weeks to a couple of months, until in the early 80s she met her future second husband, Ronnie Jennings. The tumultuous romance soon led to marriage, and Sheila took on a double last name, Bailey Jennings. It was an unhealthy relationship between two irascible and unstable people who regularly cheated on each other, scandalized, and even fought. Still, their marriage lasted more than 3 years. In 1984, after another family quarrel, Sheila demanded a divorce from her husband, but he refused her. In fact, Ronnie did not hold on to the relationship at all. He just wanted to piss off his wife and make her mad, and he succeeded. Sheila became hysterical, took a large number of drugs in front of her husband, drinking strong alcohol, and after this infernal cocktail, sat behind the wheel of the car and rushed down the road. Naturally, soon Sheila, under the influence of pills and alcohol, lost consciousness, flew off the road, and at high speed crashed into a tree. She miraculously survived, but suffered a massive head injury. She spent more than a week in a deep coma, and doctors made no prognosis. When Sheila finally regained consciousness and gradually recovered, she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital where she spent several months. She later complained to her sister that one of the orderlies was constantly harassing her and possibly taking advantage of her helpless state when she was heavily sedated. After all this, Sheila returned to her second husband's home, but began to behave not just aggressively but threateningly toward him. When during another scandal she attacked Ronnie and poked him in the chest with nail scissors, Ronnie, fearing for his own life and health, filed for divorce and hurriedly moved out of the mad woman. Rich lover. When the second marriage was dissolved, the young woman began looking for lovers through the dating columns of the print media, and she left her ads there as well. But no man did not stay with her for long, because Sheila tended to dominate everything, rigidly suppressing their partners both in intimate and everyday life. Soon the photo of an attractive girl in the dating section drew the attention of 60-year-old Wilfred Bill Labar. The man had previously been married twice and had adult children and grandchildren from previous marriages. He was widowed a few years ago and had been living alone on his large country ranch ever since. Bill was a fairly wealthy man. He had a chiropractic office in Epping, New Hampshire, and on the ranch he raised horses. At the same time, he was very lonely and needed a strong, powerful woman. In fact, that's exactly what he found. Sheila was attracted by the wealth of her new acquaintance, and she decided that it would be an ideal union for her. And to make Bill completely lost his head, she began to send him a postal mail frank letters, supplementing them with her nude photos. The trap worked, and soon Labar invited a charming pen pal to visit his ranch. Their romance developed rapidly. An elderly man is not stingy on expensive gifts for a young mistress, and in the summer of 1987, she moved to live with him. This has incredibly flattered the doctor, who now went out in public with a beautiful companion who was half his age and was fit for him as a daughter. Nevertheless, he did not plan to marry Sheila. However, Sheila, not waiting for a marriage proposal, changed her name, calling herself Labar. Bill was surprised by this turn of events, but he did not object. Sheila began to interfere in all the affairs of her elderly lover, starting to control his business, finances, and disposition of his property. In addition, Bill was getting older and could not satisfy the intimate needs of a young woman. Then, according to Sheila herself, he allowed her to meet other men, whom she often brought directly to their home. One of Sheila's regular lovers, closer to the mid-90s, was a Jamaican national named Wayne Ennis. He was much younger than Sheila and was initially hired as an au pair on the ranch, but soon the young man, with Bill's consent, which was probably given under pressure from Sheila, moved to live in the owner's house. In 1995, Sheila and Wayne officially legalized their relationship, and the spouse considered that from now on he would be her only man. But soon he realized that he was wrong, because his wife continued to meet with different men. Wayne was not satisfied with this, and one day he jumped with fists on Sheila and her next lover, causing them bodily harm. Accustomed to being dominated, Sheila for the first time didn't know how to deal with her third husband, who got into a fight every time a rival appeared on the horizon. Eventually, she filed for divorce and sought a court injunction to stop Wayne from approaching her, accusing him of violence and assault. Another divorce did not affect the turbulent personal life of Sheila, who continued to meet with numerous lovers, changing them like gloves. True, now her relationship increasingly often began to end with lawsuits from men who accused Sheila not just in cruelty, but also in the threat to their lives and health. Thus, one of her boyfriends she deliberately hit by a car and almost ran over. Another almost broke his head, and another scratched his face so that he was forever scarred. Sheila, with age, became more and more dangerous to others. From every man she demanded obedience, and in cases of disobedience, fell into a rage. In 2000, at the age of 74, Bill Labar died of heart failure. Although doctors and police officers did not see a criminal trail in the death of an elderly man, his family members were convinced that Sheila had something to do with it. In their opinion, She had been poisoning Bill little by little for years, and literally drove him into the light. Despite the fact that Bill and Sheila were never officially married, Sheila, according to the will, became the sole heiress of all his property. The relatives tried to challenge this through the courts, but never got anywhere. They are still convinced that the mistress forced Bill to write the will she wanted. House of Temptation. After Bill's death, as I have already mentioned, all his property came under Sheila's complete control. Now she no longer had to consider anyone's opinion. She could do whatever she wanted with the estate she had inherited. She herself called her home a place of seduction and pleasure, where there were no inhibitions. She met men on the streets, in bars, on the internet, lured them to her, and then tried to keep them on the ranch as long as possible. She didn't care about their age, skin color, or any physical appearance. She promised them unearthly pleasure, and then sought to suppress and subjugate them to her will. Sheila regularly tried to seduce couriers by meeting them in the nude and offering an alternative method of payment. But she didn't take into account the fact that she herself was not getting any younger, and was nowhere near as attractive as she used to be. It got to the point where couriers simply refused to come to her address. Neighbors noticed that on the ranch, La Barre, constantly come different men, but some hurried to leave the place the same day. Others were delayed, but also for a short time. What was going on in the house itself could only be guessed at. Where had Michael DeLorge disappeared to? Soon, Sheila decided to look for lovers among men who were in dire need of housing, money, or those men who suffered from addiction. This category was the most vulnerable, and proved to be an easy prey for the cunning woman, who everywhere posed as a widowed millionaire, and talked about her untold wealth, inherited by her. In 2004, La Barre met on one of the city streets homeless man named Michael DeLodge. He was in a difficult life situation and lost literally everything because of addiction to illegal drugs. His relatives tried to send him to a rehabilitation clinic, but he ran away from there and has been loitering ever since. Sheila liked Michael, and she invited him to her, promising shelter, food, and the necessary drugs in exchange for intimacy. Moving to the ranch, the guy was completely dependent on his old mistress. He complied with all her demands, afraid to be on the street again. But Sheila quickly got into the taste, and her desires became more and more sophisticated. She bound, beat, and humiliated Michael, taking pleasure in it. He tried to escape several times, walking dozens of miles and hiding in homeless shelters, but he never decided to go to the police for fear they wouldn't believe him. Meanwhile, Sheila found him each time and brought him back to the ranch. In desperation, he tried to contact his family members and let them know he was in trouble. His loved ones immediately responded to this disturbing news, but it was too late. In October 2005, Michael DeLorge disappeared without a trace. When his family contacted Sheila directly, she stated that she and Michael had broken up. He had left her, and his current whereabouts were unknown to her. Michael did not show up at any of the places he had been to before. No one who knew him had seen him, and there was no way to contact him. Contacting the police was fruitless, and La Barre remained beyond suspicion, trusting Kenny County. Sheila's tales of her exorbitant wealth were greatly exaggerated, and the house and automobile had to be maintained, so she was forced to get a job. Naturally, Sheila chose an occupation to her liking. She became an operator of intimate phone services. Since she had a truly enchanting voice, men fell for the bait and offered to meet her in person. Among such guys was Kenny County, who at the time of their acquaintance was barely 24 years old. The young man was attractive in appearance, very good-natured and open. However, he had a low IQ level, due to which he was very gullible. This was exactly the kind of guy La Barre was looking for. Kenny was very close to his mother, on whom he actually depended, but Sheila, with the help of clever manipulations, managed to break this connection and literally lure Kenny to herself. She made him an unforgettable night of love and promised that they would be like this all the time. The young man decided that he had met the woman of his dreams, about which he informed his relatives, and then moved to live in Sheila's house. But soon Sheila showed the guy her true face, having arranged for him a real torture room in one of the rooms. Each time, intimacy inevitably turned into a brutal beating or something worse. Kenny's body was covered with bruises, abrasions, scratches, cuts, and burn marks. But he could not leave the house of the mistress who had completely subjugated his will. Sheila did not allow him to see and communicate with his loved ones, and his family could only guess what was happening to Kenny. The first alarm was raised by neighbors who periodically noticed the guy and were horrified by his sickly appearance. A few days before his disappearance, a local store clerk took a picture of the young man on her cell phone camera, and later this picture was attached to the case file in court. In the photo, Kenny's condition could be described as deplorable. He was very thin, there were huge bruises under his eye and on his cheek, and his nose was probably broken. Judging by the degree of healing, all these injuries had been inflicted at different times, which suggested that the guy had been brutally beaten for a long time. The contents of his cart were also alarming. He rolled 2 large canisters of fuel to the cash register, as it later turned out, for his own cremation. The store employees were so puzzled and even frightened by the guy's appearance that they decided to report him to the police for possible domestic violence. But this time, Sheila managed to get away with it, and they could not charge her with anything. Soon Kenny stopped contacting his family altogether, and when his worried mother arrived at Labar's house, the owner behaved aggressively and advised to leave Kenny alone. All subsequent attempts ended similarly, at which point Kenny County's family filed a missing persons report with the police, indicating that he may be being held forcibly at the country ranch, a home crematorium, and gruesome findings. When police arrived at Sheila's home, she claimed that the young man no longer lived with her, and claimed that Kenny had run away because his mother, whom he was allegedly terrified of, began visiting them frequently. As evidence, Sheila provided an audio recording in which she asks her lover if his own mother had attacked him, and he quietly gives an affirmative answer. It all seemed more than strange, and the very next day, an officer visiting Sheila secured a search warrant for the estate. Sheila had been on the police's radar many times before, and her name had been linked to another mysterious disappearance of a boyfriend. But over the years, Sheila had never been questioned, and her house and grounds had never been searched. When the police arrived, they did not find Labar at home, but they did see several fires burning near the outbuildings. The fires looked strange and were made of improvised materials, a mattress, fragments of wooden furniture, hay, etc., all doused with a flammable mixture. One of the bonfires had bones in it that clearly looked like human remains. The squad requested reinforcements in the form of forensic experts, reporting all the findings, but that turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg compared to what they discovered next. Almost all over the house were found poorly washed traces of blood. It was so much that it seemed as if there had been a real massacre. It turned out that the blood belonged to at least 3 different people. The bones smoldering in the fire belonged to the missing Kenny, and there were 2 empty fuel cans lying nearby, the same ones the boy had bought at the local store the day before. But that wasn't all. Also found on the property were the remains of Michael Delage, who had disappeared a few years earlier, and some fingers of some third guy who was never identified. Among other things, a large number of items belonging, judging by the size, to various men were fished out of the sump at the ranch, the fates of which have not been learned. The hostess herself was not at home at the time of the police visit. She had figured it out and gone on the run. Sheila hitchhiked to Boston, where she obviously hoped to get lost. Moreover, on the way, she seduced one of the drivers who gave her a ride, and he trustingly invited her to live in his house. However, the next day, having seen on TV news about the search for a dangerous criminal, the new lover himself called the police and reported that Sheila is now in his bed. It was there that she was arrested. During the search of Sheila's home, another frightening find was made: a box of videotapes. On the tapes, Kenny, Michael, and several other men confessed to horrific crimes, but judging by the guy's appearance and condition, they made these confessions under torture. Since Labar's arrest, her mental health has raised a lot of questions, so the court ordered the necessary evaluations. Sheila was found to have a delusional disorder, as well as signs of schizophrenia. She called herself an angel sent from heaven to protect children from rapists. It was Sheila's failing mental health that became the basis on which her attorney tried to build a defense. He called his client a profoundly sick person and tried to prove that she was not aware of her actions. The reason for this was the mental and physical trauma she had suffered as a child. The defendant herself claimed that many years ago, when she was in that terrible accident and found herself in a coma on the verge of death, she met with God, and the latter told her to cleanse the world of men who infringe on children. Sheila's ex-husbands and some of Sheila's lovers also spoke in court, who, in one voice, called her a crazy, unstable, and extremely violent woman. And Wayne Ennis, the third husband, said that the ex-wife repeatedly persuaded him to kill Mr. Labar in order to seize his property. But despite the defense's attempts to convince the court that Sheila was insane and in need of treatment, it was proven that she was aware of her actions at the time of her crimes. She was found guilty in July 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of ever being released. All of her appeals were rejected. Sheila is now serving her sentence in Florida at Homestead Correctional Facility. On December 1, 2022, the Mendoza Criminal Court stood waiting, holding its breath. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense, and the surrounding area was filled with people waiting for the verdict. On the dock sat a woman aged 32, dressed in a black dress, with white beads around her neck. Her face expressed not a single emotion, and her eyes burned with only equanimity and restraint. She was preparing to hear the judgment that would determine her fate and leave a mark on history. Everyone in the room had known this woman for many years, but now they were faced with a mystery that was difficult for them to understand. Outside the courtroom doors, the approaching footsteps of the judge could be heard, like the pounding of a heart, echoing in the silence and felt in every corner of the place. Everyone knew that what was at stake today was not only the fate of the woman in the dock, but also the truth that had remained in the shadows for so long. There was a whole story behind this woman, the events of which were as mysterious as she was. The truth of this real crime is hidden in the details, and the trial becomes a real challenge for all involved. Manado is a small town hidden among the mountains and valleys of the Argentine province of Mendoza. This is the place where nature reveals its most beautiful colors. In autumn, the streets are sprinkled with golden leaves, and the mountain peaks are painted in shades of orange and red. The residents of Manado know each other well, and everyone can tell the biography of their neighbors. Here, people share joys and sorrows, support each other in difficult moments, and celebrate important events together. In this secluded place, among the mountains and valleys, Rolando Angel Aquino and Karen Oviedo began a romance that would later shake Manado and all of Argentina. When the streets of the city, surrounded by colors of autumn gold, as if frozen in anticipation of something long awaited, the fates of the two young people of this story intertwined. Rolando Angel Aquino, a man with a magnetism capable of attracting the attention of others, could not help but notice the exciting gaze of Karen Oviedo. She was a woman with fire in her eyes, a passion for life, and an energy that instantly won his heart. The young people were very similar in their interests and dreams, and the determination and entrepreneurial thirst of both inspired them. This meeting was an accident that gave them a chance for true happiness. Finally, they found in this relationship what they had been looking for in others for so long. So in 2016, the lovers started living together and opened their own business, a warehouse, which was located in the house where they lived. Karen has always had a special eye for detail, and she lovingly created a sign on one of the windows for customer service. Next to it were lists of items for sale. It was their little corner that they were rightfully proud of. The people of Manado watched this happy and determined couple with interest and respect. Everyone wondered who these young people were and how they managed to accomplish so much. Many people knew Karen from childhood, but Rolando remained a mystery. No one knew anything about his past, except that he came from Bolivia. Rolando not only ran the business with Karen, but also worked at the fair in Guimalin, where wholesale fruit sales were held. Looking at this couple, it seemed like they had found their little paradise on Earth. But sometimes, even the strongest and most sincere relationships can face a test. One day, Rolando was taken aback when he caught Karen in the car with another man. His reaction was a flash of anger. In that moment, he nearly destroyed everything inside the interior of the car. The picture of happiness crumbled in a matter of minutes. But then, Rolando agreed to give them a chance. choosing to forgive and continue to move forward with his beloved. In the eyes of others, they remained a model of an ideal couple, able to overcome all difficulties together. Rolando Angel Aquino is an enigmatic figure who was born in 1987 in Bolivia. His exact date of arrival in Argentina remains unknown, like many other aspects of his life. As the eldest of 7 children in his family, Rolando learned from an early age the value of family bonds and hard work. His ideal was a happy family filled with joy and children's laughter. In his youth, he met Carolina Chavez, from whom he later had a son. Despite the difficulties, the couple remained on good terms. Later in his life appeared Soledad Guardio, who gave him another son, Elias. Relationships with Soledad also did not work out. However, Rolando was always a devoted father who took care of his children. He kept in touch and always maintained a warm relationship with the mothers of his children. From a young age, Rolando was a physically fit man who took care of his health by playing sports and playing soccer for the local team. Colleagues and loved ones described him as a kind and very hard-working man. Neighbors in his neighborhood got along well with him, but Rolando always showed a distinct shyness in socializing. Karen was born March 30th, 1990, and spent her childhood and youth in Manado, in the same house where she and Rolando later established their warehouse. She was well known among the locals as an outgoing and open-minded woman. Like Rolando, Karen dreamed of a happy and successful family with a caring and devotedly loving man. However, it took her some time to find the one man with whom she could build her happiness. Before meeting Rolando, Karen had already attempted to create a happy relationship that resulted in the birth of 2 wonderful girls. One of her former partners, Raul Ojeda, became the father of one of them, and Karen married him in 2013. However, as time went on, that marriage was on the verge of breaking up. According to Raul, financial difficulties were one of the reasons for the conflict. Worried about his life and in search of new opportunities, Raul decided to leave his family. On the pretext of buying some necessary item, he fled the city and traveled abroad, changing buses to make it difficult to track his whereabouts. In this way, he sought to evade all attempts to locate him. In the summer of 2019, 9-year-old Elias arrived at Rolando and Karen's house. They had many plans for the near future that they wanted to spend together. However, on the morning of July 12, 2019, when Rolando came to wish his son a good morning before leaving for work, he noticed that the boy was not feeling well. The father immediately decided to take his son to the children's hospital to see a pediatrician. There, after examination, it became clear that Elias's condition is critical, and he was immediately sent to the intensive care unit. Despite the best efforts of the medical staff, little Elias died shortly after he was brought to the hospital. The amazing thing was that he left home perfectly healthy, without any unusual symptoms, and arrived at his father's house also perfectly healthy. However, the medical report was devastating. It stated that Elias died of 3rd-degree poisoning, which caused multi-organ failure and cerebral thrombosis. These conclusions left Elias's parents in complete bewilderment, as their son seemed to be completely healthy and active, and suddenly died of an incomprehensible disease. Following their professional duty, the doctors insisted on conducting an additional forensic medical examination. However, Elias's mother and grandmother, dumbfounded by the loss, refused this procedure. Karen offered to cremate the boy's body, but Elias's mother also refused, preferring to bury her son in a private cemetery so that she could come and lay flowers on his grave. Elias's death was a blow that broke Rolando's heart. He was devastated by the unexpected loss of his youngest son. The caring and loving Karen never left Rolando for a moment. She took care of all the business, carefully supported her boyfriend, and helped him through his pain and grief. Over time, with the warmth and support of the woman he loved, the pain began to subside. 16 months after this terrible tragedy, Rolando decided to take a big step and propose to Karen. They got married, and the man was sure that this woman would always be by his side. However, their happiness turned out to be short-lived. On February 6, 2022, Karen returned home after a beauty salon and working out at the gym, and noticed that Rolando began to experience serious health problems. The next day, February 7th, she found a medical ambulance outside their home. Rolando, 35, suddenly felt very ill. After vomiting profusely, he collapsed in the living room of their home, and the housekeeper called for emergency medical help. The doctors allowed Karen to pass to her husband. When Rolando was taken to the Santa Maria clinic, his condition was critical. Despite the efforts of the medical staff, the young man passed away on February 9th. The cause of his death was severe poisoning. Given that Rolando was a healthy man who was active in sports, the medical staff began to ask questions of his wife. Karen confirmed that Rolando was taking medication to remove dark spots on his skin. For specialists, this information was highly suspicious. Tests revealed a significant excess of calcium oxalate crystals in Rolando's system, which is a characteristic sign of poisoning by ethylene glycol, the main component of antifreeze for cars. The investigation into this strange and unexpected death of Rolando became a high priority for authorities. The prosecutor's office was actively investigating the neighborhood where the Aquino couple lived. Neighbors became important witnesses, reporting that Karen had repeatedly given her husband some unknown medication. They were aware that she used these medications to go to a party without her husband. However, neighbors also expressed doubts about what happened to Rolando's son, which led investigators to think and consider the theory that Karen may have only wanted to temporarily sedate her husband rather than take his life. However, the findings of the Technology Crimes Unit officers completely ruled out this hypothesis. Requests for various forensic examinations were sent, and Karen, the wife of the deceased, was thoroughly questioned. Many contradictions arose during the interrogation. The investigating officers called on Karen to name the substance she had slipped to her husband before his death. The woman claimed that it was just a skin blemish remedy and that she had administered it through an IV. However, when she was asked to provide a vial of the solution, Karen said that the housekeeper had already thrown the drug away. A further interview was then conducted with the housekeeper, Claudia Cortez, who denied Karen's statement regarding the discarded vial. She also reported that she had overheard a conversation between the couple in which Rolando expressed dissatisfaction with the medication he was receiving. Karen was detained during the investigation, and her cell phone was seized. Rolando's family, friends, and teammates were shocked by the news of his death. For visitors to the Aquino couple's warehouse and other locals, it was also a shock. No one could understand what had happened or why the father of the family had bid farewell to the world so suddenly. Raul, Karen's ex-husband, was extremely surprised when rumors of a deliberate poisoning began to spread. He claimed that his ex-spouse was always affectionate and never violent towards him. After analyzing the suspect's phone, it was discovered that Karen had searched a search engine for information on the deadliest poisons and how to clear her search history. In addition, records of her 2 ethylene glycol orders from an online store were found. The Agency for Toxic Substances, as well as the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, found that it is a synthetic substance that absorbs water and is used in the production of antifreeze. This product is odorless, has a sweet taste, and is extremely dangerous to humans. With the preliminary results of the forensic examination and all the information discovered, the prosecutor's office charged Karen with willfully poisoning Rolando with a poisonous substance diluted with orange juice. Consumption of this beverage caused Rolando's health to seriously deteriorate, and he died. A series of strange and tragic events in the Aquino family forced the authorities to take drastic action. By mid-February, with enough evidence against Karen, an aggravated murder charge was filed. In parallel, suspicions surfaced as to the cause of 9-year-old Elias's death, triggering a new investigation. The prosecutor's office decided to conduct a detailed investigation into the boy's medical history. The mother claimed that Elias was fully healthy and active, and that he had suddenly gone into a coma while at his father's house, from which he never came out. The boy's death certificate indicated that the cause was a malfunction of his internal systems and cerebral thrombosis. However, investigators persistently doubted that Elias, at age 9, could have died of such causes, especially given his overall health. The prosecutor's office requested information about possible purchases of ethylene glycol and received a response confirming that Karen purchased the poison on July 2, 2019, shortly before the boy arrived at the Aquino home. Information from Elias's relatives also confirmed that Karen insisted on cremating his body. But the birth mother rejected the idea and preferred to bury her son. The evidence gathered was enough for prosecutor Claudia Rios to file new aggravated murder charges against Karen on March 4th, related to the poisoning of Elias. On March 14th, a judge ordered pre-trial detention for the woman, who tried to appeal, but the judge rejected it, affirming that she should remain behind bars until the trial began. That trial began 10 months later and was an important step in unraveling this complex and dark story. The long-awaited trial began in the Mendoza Criminal Court, attracting public immediate attention. November 28, 2022 was the beginning of the nationwide trial of Karen Oviedo. 2 indictments were pending. The first, led by prosecutor Fernando Guzzo, concerned the murder of Elias, and the second, involving Claudia Rios, touched on the murder of Rolando. When the trial began, Rolando's eldest son, Javier Aquino, who was only 15 years old, appeared as a plaintiff, supported by counsel. Prosecutor Guzzo argued that Karen killed first Elias, and then his father by giving them ethylene glycol mixed with orange juice. This led to the severe poisoning and death of the son and father. Karen's defense representatives sought to refute the charges against her. They argued that Rolando was violent and abusive to their client, and that there was no credible evidence to support the allegations. The defense also stressed that Karen had no motive for the murder. Why would she kill Elias? Obviously, little Elias could not have posed a threat. Karen's attorney pointed out that the house, cars, and business belonged only to her. He also argued that her client had not made any purchases through her phone, and why would she have searched the internet for information about poisons when she had already used ethylene glycol to poison Elias, as the prosecutor claimed. The lawyer emphasized that while the actions that led to the deaths of the father and son are heinous, it does not give the right to indict a person until they are fully proven guilty. The defense attempted to sow doubt among the jury by arguing that the charges against Karen were false, and Karen claimed that the antifreeze purchase could have been made by her partner by hacking into her account. She also claimed she had an alibi for when her husband was poisoned. On February 6th, Karen was not at home when he began having health problems. The defendant, known to the media as the Guaymalan poisoner, was given the opportunity to speak after the initial phase of the trial was over. Judge Diego Liberty allowed her to speak, and Karen passionately argued that she was being accused of a horrific crime she did not commit. It was extremely painful for her to realize this, especially since she was the mother of 2 young daughters. The court hearing continued, and it was the turn of witness testimony that revealed new aspects of the case. The prosecution decided to address several questions to Karen. Prosecutor Guzzo, focusing on key points, asked her if Karen had suggested that her son Rolando be cremated. To this question, Karen responded emphatically that the decision on this matter was not up to her, and she had never made any such suggestion. The prosecution called as witnesses relatives of the deceased to reveal further details of what had happened. Soledad, Elias's mother, told the court that after her son's death, Rolando relayed to her Karen's words, in which she suggested that Elias's body be cremated so that both families could keep the boy's ashes. However, Soledad rejected the idea. She also shared her memories of meeting Rolando at the cemetery, where she was told about Karen's jealousy. According to her, Karen even slept in a separate bed, that the relationship between Rolando and Karen was so tainted that the couple slept separately. Another witness was Carolina, the mother of Rolando's first child. She confirmed that according to her ex-husband, the couple slept separately, but Carolina herself had not had any interaction with Karen prior to the incident. However, on the morning of February 8th, Karen herself called her to inform her that Rolando was sick and in the hospital. Karen told Carolina that her husband had probably taken some medication and was feeling ill. She also asked Carolina to help her unlock her husband's cell phone, claiming that she had suspicions that he was seeing another woman. Carolina was shocked to learn of Rolando's condition, as they had seen each other just a few days ago and he seemed perfectly healthy. She revealed that when she arrived at the hospital, Karen was already there and had gone to see the doctors. Caroline wasn't allowed inside, so she was left waiting. Later, as she was leaving the hospital, Karen told her that no one else was there and everyone had left. This made Caroline very suspicious, and she demanded an explanation from the doctors, to which the doctor announced that the patient had lost consciousness and was not responding to treatment. Caroline then went to the hospital secretary and complained. After talking to Karen, Carolina learned that Rolando had taken medication for skin blemishes, after which he had had an allergic reaction. She claimed that the medication bottle no longer existed because the housekeeper had thrown it away. All these details added to the mystery of this complex case. The trial continued, and now doctors and experts stood before the jury to present forensic evidence and the results of a psychological examination. This evidence threw light on details that had gone unnoticed earlier. Dr. Ivana Marinelli, a pediatrician at the hospital, described how she cared for Elias in July 2019 when the boy was hospitalized. She described that Elias was brought to the medical facility with severe breathing difficulties and urgently required intubation. He also underwent a CT scan which revealed a deep cerebral thrombosis. Elias was given a course of intensive care. The doctor also confirmed that the symptoms that Elias had were consistent with ethylene glycol poisoning. This included impaired consciousness, restlessness, and a subsequent coma accompanied by a blood clotting disorder. Despite the best efforts of medical personnel, the boy's condition worsened, and after 5 p.m. on July 12, cardiac and respiratory arrest ensued. Doctors tried to resuscitate Elias for 50 minutes with the participation of his father, but all efforts were futile. He was pronounced dead at 6 p.m. The jury also read the results of Karen's psychological examination, conducted at the request of the prosecution. In their findings, the experts emphasized that Karen had lied and concealed the truth. She was presented as a person seeking to create an image of a decent person, but in reality she was characterized as cold and cruel. In their conclusions, the experts also noted that a psychological examination was conducted immediately after Karen's husband's death, but did not reveal any emotional effects related to the loss of her spouse. This raised doubts about Karen's sincerity and characterized her as a cold-blooded and self-focused woman. The examiners found evidence of latent hostility and impulsive behavioral reactions in Karen. Finally, Prosecutor Guzzo expressed doubt that Karen was a victim of gender-based violence as she portrayed herself in her testimony. All of this information described the true psychological profile of the defendant. The long weeks of tense waiting and continuous court hearings came to a close. The trial brought many people together in the courtroom, their eyes fixed tensely on the jury and the judge, awaiting the decision that would bring justice to this complex and tragic story. The prosecutor, in moving for a judgment of conviction against Karen, assured the jury that all the evidence gathered strongly suggested that she was the one who planned and committed both murders. She purchased ethylene glycol in cold blood, disposed of the packaging, and disguised it as regular juice. Karen watched her loved ones die without providing help in their moment of suffering. Prosecutor Claudia Rios, who is prosecuting Karen's case for Rolando's murder, provided the court with an ethylene glycol purchase sheet paid from Karen's bank account. The prosecution and the plaintiff insisted that the jury reach a unanimous verdict because that would be the only way to achieve justice in the case. They insisted that Karen Oviedo be found guilty of murder with evidence of extreme cruelty. The defense, on the other hand, insisted that there was insufficient evidence to fully prove her client's guilt. The defense attorney argued that a person can be good or bad, but that it is not always related to the commission of a crime, and that for their client, the death of Rolando and his son was an incredible tragedy and a sad event. However, despite the arguments of the defense, Karen Oviedo has put herself on the list of Argentine criminals who poisoned their victims. After a long silence and tense waiting for the verdict, the jury made their decision. They handed down a unanimous verdict. Karen Oviedo was found guilty of killing Elias and committing the crime with particular cruelty. She was also found guilty of Rolando's aggravated death by insidious procedure. Karen, standing in her black outfit with white beads around her neck, listened to the verdict without apparent emotion. The jury reached a guilty verdict. She was awarded a life sentence in prison. Karen Oviedo, the woman in the dock, tried to escape punishment for the treacherous murders that shook society and left many unsolved questions. Her plans to cremate the bodies of the victims may have been her last attempt to escape the punishment she deserved. However, despite her tricks, the court and jury did not give in and rendered a just verdict. So why did Karen Oviedo kill her loved ones? That remains a mystery. She had everything she needed to be happy. Perhaps the motive lies in the depths of her own soul, in jealousy, self-interest, pride. Karen refused to admit her guilt, which is why the motives behind this horrific crime remain unclear. Karen Oviedo will now face long years behind bars, pondering what dark forces may have so badly ruined her and those around her. In the midst of winter, when families gather to celebrate peace and joy, a sinister shadow loomed over the picturesque town of Dover, Arkansas. It was December 1987, a time meant for festivity and love, but for one family, it became a scene of overwhelming horror. This is the chilling tale of the Christmas killer Ronald Gene Simmons, a man who transformed the season of giving into a time of unspeakable tragedy. But what leads a person to destroy what they once cherished? What darkness lies within the human mind that can turn a father into a monster? From decorated war hero to a man convicted of the worst family massacre in American history, we'll delve into the depths of a mind clouded by secrets and rage, where the line between protector and predator became fatally blurred. To understand the mind behind the massacre, we must journey back to the origins of Ronald Gene Simmons. His story begins not with violence, but with a seemingly ordinary life, marked by service and family. Ronald Gene Simmons was born on July 15, 1940, in Chicago, Illinois. His father died of a stroke when Ronald was 3. His mother got married again in less than a year to a civil engineer for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who was transferred to Arkansas. Little is known about Simmons's early childhood, but it was a life that took a turn towards discipline and commitment when Ronald dropped out of school and enlisted in the United States Navy in 1957, and later the U.S. Air Force. Simmons served with distinction. Over a 22-year career, he received several commendations, including the Bronze Star Medal, the Republic of Vietnam Gallantry Cross, and the Air Force Ribbon for excellent marksmanship. But behind the facade of a decorated military man, there were undercurrents of turmoil. Simmons married Rebecca Ulibarri in 1960 in New Mexico, and together they had 7 children. However, the veneer of a normal family life was shattered in 1981 when allegations emerged that Simmons had been the assaulting his 15-year-old daughter, Sheila, and had fathered a child with her. Fearing prosecution, Simmons uprooted his family, moving them from New Mexico to a desolate 13-acre tract of land in Pope County, 6.5 miles north of Dover, Arkansas, known as Mockingbird Hill. This property, isolated and ringed with a makeshift fence, up to 10 feet tall, became a fortress of sorts, a place where Simmons could exert total control. The residents didn't have a phone or indoor plumbing. But what was it that drove a man of discipline and service to the edge of such darkness? Was it the fear of losing control over his family, the desperation to conceal his illicit acts, or something deeper, a more sinister aspect of his psyche yet to be revealed? The facade of the family man began to crumble, revealing a tyrannical figure, ruling his household with an iron fist. The family, once a symbol of joy and unity, became prisoners in their own home. This descent into tyranny was but a prelude to the horror that would unfold, unraveling the chilling transformation of Ronald Gene Simmons from a respected military man to one of the most notorious mass murderers in American history. In November 1979, Simmons retired from the Air Force and military service. He did some low-paying jobs in the nearby town of Russellville, Arkansas. He worked as an accounts receivable clerk at Woodline Motor Freight, but had to resign after multiple reports of inappropriate sexual advances. He worked for about a year and a half at a Sinclair mini-mart, but had to quit on December 18, 1987, because of low wages. 2 of the elder children, Billy and Sheila, had moved out, got married, and started their own families. So by the time of the murders, there were only 7 people living in the house. The calm of the holiday season in 1987 was shattered in Dover, Arkansas, by a series of heinous crimes. Ronald Gene Simmons' descent into murderous madness began shortly before Christmas, on December 22nd. The Simmons family home, once a haven of domestic life, turned into a chilling stage for an unthinkable act. Ronald Gene Simmons, armed with a .22 caliber pistol, commenced a killing spree that would become the worst family massacre in American history. His first victims were his wife, 46-year-old Rebecca, and eldest son, 26-year-old Ronald Jr., bludgeoned with a crowbar and shot. And he strangled Ronald Jr.'s daughter and his granddaughter, 3-year-old Barbara. Their demise was just the beginning. Simmons lay in wait for his other children, feigning a festive spirit, only to mercilessly end their lives. One by one, later that day, the Dover school bus dropped off the younger kids for their Christmas break from school. In a macabre ritual, Simmons systematically strangled and drowned his younger children, displaying a level of brutality that defies comprehension. The youngest victims, mere toddlers, met a similar fate, their innocence stolen in the most atrocious way. Simmons told them he had gifts for each of them, which he wanted to give one at a time, then strangled them and held under the water in a rain barrel. First to receive her gift was his eldest daughter, 17-year-old Loretta. His 3 other children, 14-year-old Eddie, 11-year-old Marianne, and 8-year-old Becky, were murdered in the same brutal manner. He then dumped the bodies in one of the cesspits he had made his children dig days before. But the horror did not end there. On December 26th, as the rest of the world celebrated, Simmons' remaining family members arrived for a holiday visit, unaware of the nightmare that awaited them. 23-year-old Simmons' son Billy, his 21-year-old daughter-in-law Renata, and their child were the next to fall victim to his unfathomable rage. Billy and Renata were both shot dead. Their bodies were left by the dining room table next to the decorated Christmas tree with unopened gifts and covered with their own coats and some bedding. Then their 20-month-old son, Trey, was strangled and drowned. The same fate befell his 24-year-old daughter, Sheila, her 33-year-old husband, Dennis, and their children. Simmons strangled his and Sheila's child, 6-year-old Sylvia, and finally, his 21-month-old grandson, Michael. The bodies were meticulously laid out, a grim tableau that defied any sense of humanity. He then covered their bodies with coats. Sheila's body was laid on the dining room table and covered with Rebecca Simmons' best tablecloth. He wrapped the bodies of Trey and Michael in plastic sheeting, and they were left in abandoned cars behind the Simmons home. Simmons then embarked on a chillingly ordinary series of errands, his actions a stark contrast to the carnage he had just inflicted. He drove to a Sears store in Russellville to pick up Christmas gifts previously ordered for his family. That night he went out for a drink at a local bar. When he returned home, he spent the night and the next day drinking beer and watching television surrounded by the dead bodies of his family. On December 28th, the killing spree spilled over into the town of Russellville. In the morning, Simmons drove a car that had belonged to his son, Ronald Jr., to a Walmart in Russellville and purchased a second firearm. Fueled by a mix of revenge and rage, Simmons targeted those he felt had wronged him. The violence was indiscriminate, claiming the lives of acquaintances and strangers alike. His former workplace, a law firm, became the stage for his continued rampage. 24-year-old Kathy Kendrick, a secretary who had rebuffed his advances, was his first victim. She was fatally shot. The brutality continued at the Taylor Oil Company, where he shot and wounded the 38-year-old owner, Russell Taylor, who was also the owner of Sinclair Mini Mark, from which Simmons had recently resigned. He also killed a complete stranger in the building and shot at another employee before exiting the building, but missed. In Sinclair Mini Mart, Simmons shot and wounded 2 more people. He then shot his former supervisor, 35-year-old Joyce Butts, twice, and wounded her in the office of Woodline Motor Freight. She survived and testified later that Simmons had yelled at her during a previous argument about wages. The entire rampage lasted 45 minutes. 2 people were killed and 4 wounded. Simmons' final act was as perplexing as it was chilly. He said to the secretary in Woodline Motor Freight, "I just wanted to kill Joyce. Just Joyce. I've gotten everybody who wanted to hurt me." Simmons surrendered to police without resistance, his spree of violence concluding as abruptly as it had begun. But the most heinous of his crimes were yet to be discovered. Simmons sat silently in his cell and stared at the wall. He refused to speak to investigators or even his attorneys. He didn't say a word during the interrogation. But when he was asked about his family, Simmons' eyes got red and started to well up. His lips started to quiver. The police got suspicious. They couldn't reach his family, so 2 officers drove to the isolated home. The investigation began on the chilling grounds of the Simmons family home. Here, detectives encountered a scene that defied belief. Family members' bodies laid out with a chilling meticulousness. It was a tableau that spoke volumes about the mindset of the killer. In the aftermath of this unprecedented massacre, questions swirled. What drove a father, a husband, a war veteran to commit such unspeakable acts against his own family and community? And what can we learn from this tragedy to prevent such horrors in the future? In the wake of the horrific murders committed by Ronald Gene Simmons, law enforcement faced the daunting task of piecing together a puzzle that spanned both family tragedy and public rampage. As the probe widened to include Simmons' subsequent attacks in Russellville, the challenge for investigators was to understand the connection between the family murders and the seemingly random acts of violence that followed. The evidence gathered was overwhelming. Firearms, witness testimonies, and Simmons' own actions painted a picture of a man who, after committing an unspeakable act against his own family, sought to extend his vengeance to those he perceived had wronged him in the wider community. In a case that stunned even seasoned investigators, the question wasn't just who had committed these crimes, but why. What drives a man to annihilate his family and lash out at the world around him? The arrest of Ronald Gene Simmons brought an end to the immediate threat, but it was just the beginning of a quest for justice and understanding. The prosecution's task was to unravel the mind of Simmons, to present a narrative that could make sense of the senseless. As the investigation progressed, more disturbing details emerged. Allegations of abuse, control, and a life led under the tyranny of Simmons became the focus. Each piece of evidence added another layer to the dark portrait of a man who had lived a life of deception and brutality. In the courtroom, the full extent of his crimes would come to light, bringing some answers, but also leaving haunting questions about the nature of evil. What kind of man lurked behind the annihilation of his family and terrorizing a community? Simmons' life was marked by strict discipline and control, traits honed during his military career. But beneath the surface of this structured exterior lay a tumultuous inner world. Allegations of sexual assault within his family suggest deep-seated pathological behavior. Experts in criminal psychology often point to a history of abuse, either experienced or perpetrated, as a significant factor in the development of violent behavior. In Simmons' case, the blurring of boundaries within his own family, coupled with a need for dominance, may have contributed to his downward spiral. The isolation of the Simmons family at Mockingbird Hill paints a picture of a man intent on exerting absolute control. This isolation could have exacerbated existing mental health issues, creating a pressure cooker environment. What then triggered Simmons to turn to murder? The possibility of his wife seeking a divorce might have been the tipping point, challenging his authoritarian hold over his family. She had already tried to leave him on numerous occasions, but always returned. A family friend informed the police that Simmons' wife had been saving up money to divorce him when the murder happened. Simmons' wife had written to their son shortly before the killings. "I don't want to live the rest of my life with Dad. I am a prisoner here and the kids too. Every time I think of freedom, I want out as soon as possible." Simmons' actions in Russellville suggest a broader rage directed not just at his family, but at anyone he perceived as a threat or who had rejected him. His targeting of individuals in the community indicates a blend of personal vendetta and displaced aggression. Yet the absence of any recorded mental illness diagnosis leaves us with more questions than answers. The depths of Simmons' mind remain, in many ways, a locked enigma. Could this tragedy have been averted? In exploring these questions, we confront the unsettling reality of how little we sometimes know about those closest to us. After the chilling massacre by Ronald Gene Simmons, the wheels of justice began to turn, bringing us to a courtroom where the grim details of his crimes would be laid bare. After a psychiatric evaluation, it was determined that he was sane and capable to stand trial. Simmons' trial was a focal point of national attention, a legal battle to seek justice for the unprecedented atrocity he had committed. The proceedings were swift, reflecting the urgency of a community seeking closure. In May 1988, Simmons stood trial for the murders outside his family, specifically the killings of Kathy Kendrick and Jim Chaffin. The evidence presented was overwhelming, leaving little doubt about Simmons' guilt. Simmons, who had acted with such brutality, now faced the consequences of his actions in a court of law. His demeanor in court was reported as defiant, a stark contrast to the calculated coldness of his crimes. On May 12, 1988, the verdict was delivered. Ronald Gene Simmons was found guilty and sentenced to death by lethal injection, plus 147 years. Remarkably, Simmons himself requested that no appeal be made on his behalf, saying, "To those who oppose the death penalty, in my particular case, anything short of death would be cruel and unusual punishment. Because of this, he had to be separated from other prisoners on death row. His life was in danger, as they believed Simmons' refusal to appeal his death sentence was jeopardizing their prospects of escaping their own executions." The second trial for the murders of his 14 family members began in February 1989. Here, the prosecution delved into the harrowing details of the family massacre, painting a picture of a man driven by control and rage. During the trial, a shocking moment unfolded. Simmons lashed out in court, punching the prosecutor and attempting to seize a deputy's gun, an act that only added to his infamy. This happened after Simmons' letter to his daughter Sheila was introduced, in which Simmons said, "You have destroyed me, and you have destroyed my trust in you. I will see you in hell," after she had disclosed that he was her child's father to the police. On February 10, 1989, Simmons was found guilty of 14 counts of capital murder. The judge, undeterred by Simmons' outburst, handed down another death sentence. This rapid succession from trial to sentence was unprecedented, reflecting the severity of the crimes. The execution warrant for Simmons was signed by Arkansas Governor and later President Bill Clinton on May 31, 1990. All visitors, including legal counsel and clergy, were refused by Simmons. On June 25th, he died via the fatal injection method he had chosen in the Cummins unit. This was the shortest period from sentence to execution to death in U.S. history since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. His last words were, "Justice delayed finally be done is justifiable homicide." Nobody claimed his body, and he was buried in a common grave in Lincoln County, Arkansas. As we reflect on the legal proceedings against Ronald Gene Simmons, we are left to ponder the balance between justice and understanding. The case of Ronald Gene Simmons is a stark reminder of the potential for hidden dangers within our own homes, and it's crucial to recognize early warning signs. FBI profilers and psychologists suggest vigilance for certain behaviors, patterns of control, isolation, and abuse within a family. These can often be precursors to more violent actions. In cases like Simmons, where the perpetrator isolates the family, the intervention of external agencies becomes critical. Neighbors, friends, and relatives need to be attentive and proactive in reporting any suspicions. But perhaps the most profound lesson lies in understanding the human psyche. Simmons' case demonstrates the complex interplay of psychological factors that can lead to such extreme behavior. What led Ronald Gene Simmons to commit such heinous acts? The answer lies in a complex web of control, abuse, and psychological instability. His desire for dominance, coupled with deep-seated issues likely stemming from his abusive behavior within the family, set the stage for tragedy. Simmons' military discipline, juxtaposed with his chaotic personal life, created a volatile mix. The isolation and control he exerted over his family only fueled his capacity for violence. And when his authority was threatened, possibly by a looming divorce, it may have been the catalyst for the massacre. John Harris, one of Simmons's defense attorneys, said of his abused family, "I think he felt like they are going to take him out. He's going to take them out first." I think that was his mindset. Could anything have been done to prevent the carnage? In hindsight, the warning signs were there: isolation, abuse, and a man teetering on the edge. Timely intervention could perhaps have altered this tragic course. Simmons' story is a grim reminder that behind closed doors, within seemingly normal families, the seeds of tragedy can grow unnoticed. People feared him even back then in New Mexico. They said he was strange, unfriendly, antisocial. He didn't have much to say. A friend of his daughter's said, "He had a beer in his hand all the time. He had one little room he would stay in all the time. It was dark and seemed spooky, and it stunk." Attorney John Harris also said that there was more than one person to blame. If authorities had successfully arrested him back in 1981 on the basis of his daughter's sexual assault, the murders likely wouldn't have happened. However, prosecutors at the time said they had dropped the charges at the family's request. Ronald Gene Simmons' Christmas week killing spree is the worst mass murder committed by a single person in Arkansas history. What were the underlying reasons that made Simmons annihilate his whole family that once formed the core of his identity? Tell me in the comments.
Shafilea Ahmed was born on July 14, 1986, a British-Pakistani girl. Shafilea's father, Ifar Ahmed, originally hailed from the Gujarat district of Pakistan. At the age of about 20 to 22, Iftikhar moved to Britain for employment. While staying there for a while and during work, Iftikhar falls in love with a foreign girl and marries her. Soon he becomes a father, but when he returns to Pakistan and informs his family about his marriage, they do not accept it. Then Iftikhar's family puts heavy pressure on him to marry another Pakistani girl. Despite Iftikhar's resistance, he eventually succumbs to his family's insistence and he marries a Pakistani girl named Farzana. After the marriage, Iftikhar returns to Britain and, after revealing the truth to his first wife, divorces her. Then, after some time, Iftikhar calls his second wife, Farzana, to Britain from Pakistan. After coming to Britain, Iftikhar starts living with his wife in the city of Bradford in West Yorkshire. It is here that on July 14, 1986, Shafilea Ahmed is born. Shortly after Shafilea's birth, the family moves to the town of Warrington in Britain. It is here that Shafilea completes her early education. During this time, 2 more daughters are born in the family, and Iftikhar's family grows larger. Although this family resides in Britain, on holidays, Iftikhar used to take his wife and all his children to Pakistan for vacation. Now the year had come, 2003, and by now Shafilea Ahmed had also turned 17 and was studying law. Her dream was to become a lawyer. When Shafilea and the other children have a break on February 18, 2003, Shafilea comes to Pakistan with her family for vacation. During their trip to Pakistan, this family also participates in a family wedding ceremony. However, just a few days after this wedding, a major incident occurs with Shafilea. She accidentally drinks fennel floor cleaner. Actually, fennel is commonly used in Asia for cleaning floors in homes. Now, because fennel is made by mixing some chemicals and soap, drinking it causes severe pain in Shafilea's throat. The reason behind Shafilea drinking fennel is initially said to be because her parents pressured her into arranged marriage with a Pakistani boy. Because of this pressure, Shafilea drank the fennel intending to end her life. But later, her parents claimed that someone had poured fennel into an old bottle of water, kept in the same bottle usually used for drinking water, and in the darkness of the night, Shafilea mistook fennel for water and drank it. Due to this mistake, Shafilea had to endure a lot of pain. As a result, she's admitted to a hospital in Pakistan. Now, because Shafilea's injury was quite severe, she has to stay in the hospital for a long time. During this time, the holidays of other family members also end, So Iftikhar takes his 2 children and wife back to Britain, while Shafilea has to stay in Pakistan for treatment. However, shortly after, Iftikhar arranges for Shafilea's return as well, and on May 27, 2003, Shafilea returns to Britain. Straight from the airport, Shafilea is admitted to a hospital for treatment through an ambulance. After several months of treatment, Shafilea's throat heals considerably, and now she rejoins college. Alongside college, she also starts a part-time job. But on September 18, 2003, a college teacher notices that Shafilea Ahmed hasn't been coming to college for the past week. Attempts are made to contact Shafilea via phone, but she cannot be reached. When teacher asked about this to Shafilea's parents, they reveal that Shafilea has not been home for the past week. Their daughter has been missing for a week, and her parents hadn't filed any complaints about her yet, which strikes Shafilea's teacher as very strange. Immediately after this, they inform the police. Upon filing the case, a police team arrives at Shafilea's house for investigation, and questioning begins with her parents. Shafilea's parents say that they last saw Shafilea at their home on September 11, 2003, and since then, she hasn't been seen. Upon this, the police ask, "When your daughter has been missing for a week, why haven't you filed a complaint with the police yet?" To this, Shafilea's parents respond, "This is not the first time Shafilea has been missing from home for a few days. It has happened several times before." To confirm this, when the police check the records, it is revealed that Shafilea has been missing from home several times in the past. The first time was when Shafilea was only 12 years old. She went missing with her younger sister on March 10, 1998. Because of this, her parents had also filed a missing report for both their daughters with the police. However, at that time, Shafilea returned home with her sister as evening approached. According to records, Shafilea ran away from home for the second time on November 25, 2002. Once again, her father, Ifar Ahmed, filed a missing report for his daughter. After extensive searching, Shafilea was found by the police sitting in a park. According to police records, for the third time, Shafilea left home with a friend on February 3, 2003. This time, Shafilea did not return home for 2 days, and then on February 5, 2003, she went to a safe house for orphaned people and filed a report against her parents for domestic violence and mental abuse. After the report was filed, the police officer spoke with Shafilea Ahmed and her parents, and after everything was cleared up, Shafilea returned home. After this, on February 18, 2003, Shafilea, along with her 2 sisters and parents, goes to Pakistan for a family function and disappears from there shortly after returning to Britain. Now, looking at old records, the police also suspect that Shafilea Ahmed may have gone somewhere again this time and will return home in a few days. Therefore, the police try to find Shafilea in all those places where she could have gone. However, even after a few days, the police cannot find any trace of Shafilea from anywhere. Considering Shafilea's history of running away from home before, the police show a little laziness in the investigation this time. After this, some local media start making an issue out of the police's laziness. As a result, demand for a thorough search for Shafilea increases at the local level. Due to the progress in the Shafilea missing case, the police accelerate their investigation. Subsequently, they discover numerous poems written by Shafilea at her home. These poems reveal her dissatisfaction with her household environment. Her parents wished for Shafilea to lead a traditional Pakistani girl's life, but she favored Western culture. Through her poetry, she expressed this pain. As Shafilea's poems reach the public, the case gains momentum, putting pressure on the police to find her. Consequently, law enforcement intervenes, intensifying their search efforts in places Shafilea could have visited. Eventually, CCTV footage confirmed Shafilea's identity to her parents, confirming that the girl in the footage is indeed Shafilea Ahmed. A few days after Shafilea went missing, her parents identified her. This made the police believe that at least Shafilea was alive. However, a new turn in the case occurs when the CCTV footage shows Shafilea's class teacher. Actually, when the picture is shown to Shafilea's class teacher, they say that the girl in the photo is not Shafilea Ahmed. Some other people also confirm by watching the CCTV footage that the girl in the footage is not Shafilea. Now, the police find it very strange that Shafilea's parents themselves did not recognize their daughter from the CCTV footage. The police had many questions in their minds, and to find the answers to those questions, they secretly installed some audio recording devices at Shafilea's home. The police were listening to everything that was happening in Shafilea's house through an audio recording device. According to the recording, one day Iftikhar is heard saying, "In Britain, if you kill 40 people and there is no evidence against you, then the law here can't do anything to you." Additionally, one day Ifar Ahmed is heard saying, "If the police collect DNA samples from inside the car, what could happen?" Furthermore, the audio recording device captures some suspicious conversations that lead the police to suspect that perhaps Shafilea's father had something to do with his daughter. Now, because the police start to doubt Iftikhar Ahmed, they use his audio recordings as evidence, and on December 18, 2003, the police arrest Iftikhar and his wife Farzana Ahmed, along with 5 other family members, on charges of murdering Shafilea and hiding her body. The police had arrested these people solely on suspicion. The police hoped that during the investigation, some concrete evidence would be found against these peoples. However, no evidence was found against any of the arrested persons, and eventually, the police released them all. It had been a year since 2004, and there was still no evidence in the case of Shafilea Ahmed. The police were engaged in efforts to locate Shafilea. Meanwhile, floods occurred in the famous Kent River, flowing from the Sedgwick area of Britain. When the floods were under control, the body of a girl were found in extremely poor condition on the banks of this river. The distance between the place where the body was found and where Shafilea Ahmed had disappeared was 70 miles. But still, the police have doubts whether this corpse could be Shafilea's. However, to confirm this, DNA samples are collected from the dead body and then matched with the DNA of Iftikhar and Farzana. In this case, a major twist occurs when a body washed away in the flood matches with the DNA samples of Iftikhar. This meant that the body washed away from the river was not someone else's but Shafilea Ahmed's, meaning in the search for Shafilea Ahmed, whom the police had been looking for the past year, now reaches the police itself in the form of a corpse. Now, the biggest question in front of the police was who and why murdered Shafilea Ahmed. However, even before the statements and actions of corpse's parents, there were doubts, and in 2003, these 2, along with 5 others, were arrested. Therefore, once again, Shafilea's parents are arrested and questioned. The trial of this case is also going on, but even this time, no allegations can be proven against them, which leads the police to release them again. However, after that, the police detain some other suspects and proceed with the investigation against all of them. But despite many efforts, the police cannot reach the murderer. As time passes, people slowly start to forget about Shafilea Ahmed's case. Shafilea disappeared in 2003, and now it was 2010. That is, it had been 7 years since Shafilea's death. By now, Shafilea's family had also moved on from the incident and had become busy with their daily lives. But then, on August 25, 2010, a major theft occurs at Iftikhar Ahmed's house. By now, Iftikhar Ahmed's family had already become the center of attention in the city due to their daughter's disappearance. Due to this, when theft occurs in this house, it starts making headlines on the front page of newspapers. But once again, this puts heavy pressure on the police. Despite working honestly, the police quickly get involved in the search for the thief. After many days of hard work, the police make a revelation that surprises everyone. Actually, the police arrest not someone else, but Iftikhar Ahmed's daughter, Alicia Ahmed, on charges of theft in the house. In fact, Alicia was Shafilea's younger sister. According to Alicia, she didn't get as much money from home as she demanded and needed. Because of this, she orchestrated the theft of her father's money at her own home. However, the police had solved the theft case very quickly. But the police spot an opportunity here and now. They start talking to Alicia about her sister Shafilea, who disappeared many years ago, and reopen the file related to the Shafilea case. In the initial conversation, the police suspect that Alicia knows something about the disappearance of Shafilea that the world is still unaware of. The police officers try to uncover what happened with Shafilea, but Alicia refuses to cooperate with them. However, the police then tell Alicia, "You have orchestrated a theft in your own house, which could lead to a long prison sentence for you. But if you can provide any information about Shafilea that nobody else knows, your sentence could be significantly reduced." Afterwards, when Alicia reveals some details to the police, everyone is left stunned. Alicia explains, "It was not someone else but my father, Iftikhar, and my mother, Farzana Ahmed, who had beaten Shafilea Ahmed in front of all of us sisters. Then our father put polythene on her face, and due to suffocation, she was dead. Then he placed Shafilea's body in his car and threw it into the distant jungle. However, due to the flood, the body drifted to the riverbank from the jungle." According to Alicia, Iftikhar and Farzana did not like their daughter's modern lifestyle at all. On the surface, Shafilea started falling in love with a boy, and when this matter comes to light, Iftikhar and Farzana quickly try to arrange Shafilea's marriage with their preferred boy. When the family goes to Pakistan for a family function, there is an attempt to forcefully marry Shafilea to a boy there, but Shafilea refuses to marry for this reason, and she consumes fennel. After that, her health deteriorates, and her marriage does not happen either. When Shafilea returns to Britain, her family members here also insist on arranging her marriage with a boy of their choice. But when Shafilea repeatedly refuses this marriage, her father gets angry, and at first beats Shafilea in anger and then covers her face with a polythene bag, and then due to suffocation, Shafilea Ahmed dies here. But immediately after this disclosure, Alicia Ahmed becomes a government witness in the case. In exchange, she is assured a minimum sentence in the theft case. However, based on Alicia's statement on September 2, 2010, Farzana and Iftikhar are arrested, and then a case of their own daughter's murder is pursued against them. Both of them remain in jail for several months after the arrest. However, nearly a year later, on September 15, 2011, they are granted bail by the Manchester Crown Court. In the further investigation, the police gather some crucial evidence, and based on that evidence, the trial of this case begins in the Chester Crown Court on May 21, 2012. Initially, Farzana and Iftikhar continue to deny their involvement in their daughter's murder, but when Farzana begins to suspect that she is being framed for her own daughter's murder, she finally accepts in court on July 9, 2012, that Shafilea Ahmed's murder was not committed by anyone else but by Iftikhar Ahmed himself. In her statement, Farzana also reveals that she tried to stop Iftikhar, but instead, Iftikhar beat and threatened her family, saying, "If any of you ever talk about this to anyone, your fate will be just like Shafilea's." Now, 2 witnesses had testified against Iftikhar Ahmed. Besides, the police who gather evidence also indicate that it was Iftikhar Ahmed who murdered Shafilea, then threw her body far into the jungle. However, a natural disaster struck that area, and with the floodwaters, Shafilea's body drifted and reached the riverbank on its own. After a lengthy trial in August 2012, Farzana and Iftikhar are found guilty of murdering their own daughter and disposing of her body. After the murder, they are then sentenced to 25 years each. It is also proven in court that this was an honor killing. Following this verdict, every year on July 14th, Shafilea Ahmed's birthday, the National Day of Memory for Victims of Honor Killings, is observed in her memory. So with this, the case of Shafilea Ahmed comes to a close. However, perhaps nature also desired that Shafilea Ahmed receive justice and her killers be punished. Therefore, albeit late, Shafilea's parents, her murderers, are also sentenced,